Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we just got wrapped up with another weekend of NBA basketball, and we had a number of really entertaining games over the course of the weekend, right? So we had close to the end of the week, right on Thursday, right? This was like right after the time we recorded. We had, a great game, one of the best games of the season, Lakers-Knicks, right? Where the Lakers ended up pulling it out in overtime, 113-109, right? And the story in this one, obviously, was LeBron and Luka going off, right, for most of the game. They both had 30 each, 32 for Luka, 31 for LeBron, right? And then obviously the other story was the Knicks, right, continuing to struggle against teams above 500. But unfortunately, you had a situation where in overtime, right, Brunson ties the game up, right, because he goes off. He has 39 points. Could have probably had more if he stayed, but he hurts his ankle, makes his free throws, and then has to come out of the game. And then it's determined after that game that he's going to be out for at least 2 weeks due to an ankle sprain, which is really tough because for the Knicks, right, they had already kind of started to not play as well recently, right? Because before they played the Lakers, right, they had a couple, a bad loss to Golden State, right, where they were up for about half the game. Then in the third quarter, it completely flipped, and the Knicks were never really able to get back into it. And then, that continued the same issue that they have of being great against teams with losing records, but against teams with positive records, they just haven't been able to do much. And then obviously with Brunson getting hurt, that really puts a cap on what they can do offensively because he's the engine of their offense. Not that they don't have any other good offensive players. They don't have the same type of creation capabilities that he does, right? And that's how their team is constructed, even with the new additions of Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns. So it's tough because now they've lost 3 in a row. They've, because they lost to the Clippers. And with him being out for 2 weeks, right, that pretty much means that by the time he comes back, you're talking about close to the end of March. Not a horrible schedule, right? But there are a number of matchups where you probably would like to have him for those games, right? Including, let's say the Sacramento Kings, who mainly play well against losing teams as well, right? So, but after that, and they're a little shorthanded because I think Sabonis is hurt, right? But, the Blazers should be a winnable game, but you never know. The Blazers have, they've cooled off recently, but you never know. They play the Warriors again, so that's without Brunson, right? Because Towns didn't play in the first Warrior game, right? But he's going to play in this one, but again, no Brunson, right? So that's kind of the trade-off there, unfortunately. The Heat, winnable game. Spurs, winnable game. Hornets, winnable game. And then the Wizards, right? And the Mavs. So not like a horrible schedule. It's just, again, your margin for error is much lower because we know he's the guy that drives so much of their offense, and they're not a great defensive team. They play good defense against LA, but as a whole, they've not been a particularly inspiring defensive team. So I guess the good news is that he's not out for the rest of the season. Maybe he misses just 2.5 weeks or 3, and he comes back. We don't know, and they don't have a horrible schedule. It's just the only problem is they haven't completely clinched that 3 seed yet because they're only a few games ahead of the Bucks and the Pacers. They do have the tiebreaker against the Bucks as of right now. I think that could change because they've already won 2. I don't know if they have one more game against them, but for now they have the tiebreaker, so that does help. But obviously, Brunson being hurt, that's not really a good thing at all because you would like to kind of, for the rest of the way, be healthy going into the playoffs. But now you got to figure out a way to stay alive while some of these other teams around them have been playing really well, right? Like the Cavs have won 13 in a row. Celtics are 8-2 in their last 10. We'll get to them soon. And then the Bucks are 8-2 in their last 10. Pacers 6-4, and then Pistons 7-3. Right? They're the only team in that group that's kind of been, middle of the road. And it's the last few games that have really tripped them up, right? And a couple of them, like considering how close the Lakers game was, it went into OT. That's one that you wish you could have back. And especially if they could have won it in regulation, right? Because you had the final possession for the Knicks where they get the stop, but then they don't score at all, right? They don't even get a shot off, right? Brunson gets doubled. He gives it, up to Josh Hart, right? And then Hart is ways away from the basket. They're leaving him open for most of the game. He doesn't feel comfortable taking the jumper. He's not really that open there, right? But still. Then he drives, doesn't get a shot off, and they go into overtime. And that's one you wish you could have back because Brunson probably doesn't get hurt. And then you just kind of go the rest of the way. So pretty tough for the Knicks, and then obviously great win for LA.
Yeah, I mean, overall, like you said, it definitely hurts from the Knicks' perspective because you come out with a loss and you lose your best player. And I think that's going to really, really hurt them because we all know, the impact that he and Cat have together in the two-man game. But Jalen Brunson by himself also is, their de facto number one option no matter what go-to situation in the fourth quarter, and that's where games are won and definitely lost. So having no Brunson in the fourth quarter pretty much for 2 straight weeks, potentially more, is definitely going to hurt a ton. And, I don't really know where they go from there. That was my pick to win the finals. At times they look like they could go all the way, and at times they definitely don't. And it really shows when they play, teams that have a better record than them and simply just are above 500 in general. So, it's a good thing that they're able to beat up on teams that suck, but it's very concerning. And I think somewhat fraudulent when you really can't beat teams that are better than you. And I really don't know where they go from here because I think playing 500 basketball this late in the season is just not ideal, and it's definitely not the way that you would want to start a potential playoff run because I think it just brings in more questions in general, how you're going to look in the postseason, because I thought the general consensus on the Knicks was maybe they would, look a little bit better come postseason, in a 7-game series. But at this point, I really don't think so. I think they might be, cooked in that sense. But, losing Brunson is just probably one of the worst things that could have happened at this point in the season.
Yeah, and because again, ideally you want to use this point in the season to either clinch your spot, maybe get some rest if you've clinched up the spot, but that hasn't happened yet. Again, they have a little bit of a cushion with the teams that are behind them. It's just, again, you would like to stay ahead, not potentially start to slide and those teams start to catch up to you because, that could change the map of who you have to play in the playoffs, right? Because let's say the playoffs were today, you'd be playing the Pistons, obviously without Brunson, but I'm just saying, like, say, seeding wise right now, they'd be matched up with Detroit. And I don't think they would lose to Detroit, but I think Detroit would put up a really good fight, especially if you have a hobbled Brunson to start the playoffs, which is why, again, at least it's not a scenario where they said he's going to be out for a month, right? So that's kind of the, for an injury like that, obviously you wish you could have a better outcome because the best outcome would be if he wasn't hurt at all, but it could be worse. It's just the question is now offensively you're going to have to find ways to win without Brunson for this extended stretch because you're going to have to at least kind of stay somewhere around 500. I don't think you can kind of go the next stretch of games and just lose every game from there on out. It's just going to be too much at that point.
Yeah, and a couple things to add, like specifically in the clutch, they're 16-8 in clutch games, right? And that's pretty solid. And they're tied for the second best winning percentage, which is 67% in those situations. And then you have Brunson, who has 145 clutch points, and that's tied for the most in the league. So, I think fourth quarters, we're going to see them struggle a lot. And I don't know if you mentioned this already, but I think he's only missed like 1 or 2 games prior to this whole injury. So what the heck? I don't know if the Knicks really know how to game plan for that kind of situation, And that, I think, it was another thing that people had questions about, are they going to run out of gas? How are they going to look by the end of the season? Because, they're not the deepest team in the league. They're so top heavy and so good on that end. But then, you look at the bench and the issues that they've had throughout some of the parts of the season. And, I think it's starting to rear its ugly head. So what does this team really look like without Brunson? I think it's going to be a scary wake-up call.
Right. And then for the Lakers, right, after a great win against the Knicks, then they kind of end up having a similar situation to the Knicks, right? It's a little bit different because this game wasn't quite as close in the second half. In the first half, it was close. Then the third quarter, the Celtics ran away with it. They won 111-101. They did have a 20-point lead, plus point lead in the second half. Going into this game, right, the main thing was, Rui had been out for a while. Jackson Hayes was out. So you start the game off with a smaller lineup, right? Vanderbilt's at center, but he doesn't offer the same type of offensive, threat that Hayes does. Not that he's a scorer, but just a guy who's a lob threat who can run the floor and things like that, right? And then no Rui, that kind of hurts your interior presence, which you kind of need to have against this Celtics team. Even without Porzingis, you kind of need to have guys that can be more threats around the basket. And in the first half, right, like the Lakers did have a lead in the first quarter and for a decent chunk of the second quarter. Then they went through this long stretch where they just couldn't really get any clean shots. They were forced onto the perimeter, right? Luka really struggled in the first half, right, where Jaylen Brown was guarding him, and it was a real problem, right? Even like with an OG Anunoby, that profile, that type of player, right, a bigger, athletic, physical wing, is the type of guy that can give Luka some problems, right? You had Horford, right, who was able to kind of stay afloat, right, when he was switched on to those guys, right? They, like Derek White's probably the guy that you would prefer to hunt if you're those guys, LeBron and Luka, because of the size advantage, right? Like with Horford, obviously he's not the quickest guy, but he's a guy where if he can stay in front of you, you have to try to shoot over him, right? Whereas with White, he is, he's a great defender, but it's harder for him to defend guys like those who just are that much bigger than him, right? No one else other than those guys really played that great. Connect hit a few shots. But pretty much everybody else was quiet, right? This was a game where the Celtics wings pretty much dominated in this game, right? Tatum had 40, 12, and 8. Brown had 31 and 6, right? And they played almost the whole game. Both of them played over 40 minutes, right? But the big story in this one is that LeBron, right, he gets hurt in the game where he's out there in the fourth quarter and then has to come out and goes to the locker room because he has a groin injury. And we find out after the game, right, that he's got a groin strain. And Shams Charania reported he's going to be out for at least 1 to 2 weeks. So he's supposed to be reevaluated. We're recording this on Sunday. So he's supposed to be evaluated again on Monday, I guess, to probably confirm, how bad it is, right?
Mhm.
So they can see if he has to miss like more than 2 weeks. I don't know, right? But obviously, that's a serious situation because it's right as the Lakers are getting into a really tough stretch in their schedule where they're going to have to play 6 games in 8 days, right? 3 straight back-to-backs, including a couple of games against teams that they're, trying to stay ahead of, right? Like they'll play the Nuggets twice in that stretch, right? Including on back-to-backs, right? And that could determine who has that tiebreaker, right? Because let's say if either team wins both of those games, they get the tiebreaker, and more than likely the 2 seed is theirs, right? So that obviously hurts them. Because he's been their best player for the last couple of months at this point, right? Even since Luka's gotten here, like Luka's had some great games, but LeBron's kind of been the main driver of a lot of their wins, especially given what he's been able to do on the defensive end. And then Rui's been out, right? And that's a guy that you kind of need. And they're not like a super deep team either, like the Knicks. They do have, I guess, a pretty consistent 8 guys that they like to play, with Connect being, I guess, the 9th guy. But once one of those guys are out, there's not really anybody that you feel great about plugging in, right? Like you don't Goodwin's been playing. He wasn't very good against Boston. But he had some okay games before that, but he's also a two-way guy. He's not actually even on the regular roster, right? Cam
Right.
Reddish is, but he doesn't play at all, right? Because I don't think they really trust him. Len doesn't play at all, right? That experiment ended very quickly. So for them, now you're kind of in the span where now this is kind of Luka's turn, where he's going to have to probably carry the team while LeBron is out, right? And that's where the 2 seed might not be realistic at this point, just given how many games you have to probably win without LeBron, assuming that he doesn't come back, within the timetable that they say. Maybe he does, but you never know, right? Because he came back early from that foot injury. What was it, 2 seasons ago, right? When we thought the Lakers were done. The nice part, at least for them, is that unlike that season, they do have a little bit more of a cushion where they're not fighting for a play-in spot.
Yeah.
So, like, unless they just lose every game from here on out, they're not going to fall below 6 at all, right? And the good news for them is they have the tiebreakers against most of the teams below them, aside from a few, right? Like, they don't have it against, I think they have it against the Grizzlies, but they're going to play them one more time. So I don't think there's a guarantee that they keep it. They don't have it against Houston, but right now they have 3 fewer losses than Houston. So again, they'd have to completely slide. They have it over Golden State, and they're going to keep it because they have they've won 3 of those matchups. They have it over Minnesota because they have the divisional tiebreaker, and then they have it over the Clippers and the Kings, and I think they have it over Dallas too. So that's the good news. It's just I think ideally if you're the Lakers, you'd like to not have LeBron be hurt, right? Because obviously when he comes back, how long does it take for him to get back? Because they're going to need him to be playing somewhere close to the level he had been playing before he got hurt, right? Because he was kind of playing arguably top 5 level, right? Somewhere in that range where, you needed, especially on the defensive end too. So you needed that. But if they're healthy, right, you shouldn't feel horrible about who they get matched up with. It's just ideally you'd like to have the 2 spot because then you're going to play whoever slides into that play-in spot, which I think is just a better matchup than, any of the teams in the top 6, right? Because let's say, we don't know for sure because Golden State's been on a tear, but let's say Golden State still ends up as the 6th seed. If you're the 3 seed, that's who you have to play in the first round. Versus if you're the 2 seed, then you can play whoever else is in that mix of the playing teams, right? So some group of either Minnesota, the Clippers, or the Kings, and I think you just feel better about playing any of those teams, right? Just in general. And then obviously the other question is, do they slide into 4 or 5? Because if you slide into 4 or 5, that means you got to play OKC in the second round, which you probably don't really want to do. Just in general, just given how great they've been this season. Not that they're unbeatable. It's just I think ideally you'd rather have them play it out against whomever else is in that 4 or 5 spot. So if they can stay in 2-3, it's not the worst thing in the world. 4 or 5 isn't terrible, but it's not ideal. But I don't think they'll fall much past 4 or 5. It just kind of depends on, because some of the other teams that we've talked about have injuries too. Like Memphis is going to be without Jaren Jackson Jr. For at least a couple weeks, right? Houston, I think, unfortunately, and this one wasn't even talked about much, I think Amen Thompson just had a really bad injury where I think he was in crutches and a boot, right? So he's probably, unless his injury is not as bad as people think, he's probably going to be back, or he's probably going to be out for a while. And then I just don't think you're worried about anybody catching up to you past 5. So it's obviously not good because you would like to win as many games as you can, and it's going to be a lot harder, especially given some of these other guys that are kind of out. So that's the tough part there. But he's going to, I guess, just be out. Maybe you don't want him playing these games anyways, but again, you prefer him to be healthy and then sit as opposed to be hurt and not play. So that's the tough part there. So I don't know. It really depends on how far they fall, but they probably shouldn't fall too far, I don't think, right? At the worst case scenario, maybe they drop to the 4 or 5 spot, but it's so close. If everybody's bunched up, you could make up for it once he comes back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do want to start with the game a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to love, I think, from really both teams, honestly. That first half was really some of the best basketball I've seen, throughout the entire season.
Mm-hmm.
And, you definitely see why Boston, is somewhat of the favorite to win back to back and things of that nature. Like you look at Tatum, monster game from him. Jaylen Brown, you also see why Jaylen Brown won Finals MVP because of his defensive attentiveness and things of that nature. Derek White, Drew Holiday, they're just such a well put together team. They did it all without Porzingis. They played this game without Porzingis. That's another thing. Both these teams were not fully healthy. So, hopefully we, get to see them at full strength, going into the playoffs. But, throughout this game, I think, you love what you saw from the Lakers as well. I think there were some good stretches where obviously LeBron was killing them from, certain spots, Luka as well, AR, and obviously, the Lakers are clearly not the better team in this situation. But like I said, there still are some things that they were able to do that kind of made me feel like they had a chance at taking this game home. That is until pretty much Braun got hurt. And I think that kind of begs the question, what do the Lakers look like? I think they'll be fine. Like you said, I don't think they'll fall too far because you brought in a guy like Luka Doncic kind of for this reason. Like it's Luka's time. I think this is his time to, shine, take over. We already know when this guy's usage goes up, generally his numbers, his productivity, his impact goes up as well. So I'm hoping that that'll be the case. We'll see him, put on some monster performances. I think it'll be a rubbing of the salt in a wound, for Dallas fans because it's like, why the heck did we trade this guy? And I think he's probably going to pop off, hopefully. I know he kind of was dealing with a little bit of injury as well. I think that was
Hmm.
reported, but I think he'll play through it. He'll be fine, and the Lakers have the defensive personnel, I think, to kind of stay afloat. Like that's not really an issue for me. I think it's more so, what do they look like offensively when their second best player is out, and you can't really replace his impact, I think, on this roster in LeBron James. So I think that is the question where it's like, yeah, like you want him healthy, but at the same time, how are we going to replace this? So I think that's going to be their biggest question. But I think in the long run, they'll be okay. Like looking at the standings, it's not too bad. And I think they'll be okay because, like you said, they're number two. They're what, one game ahead of Denver, but the cards are kind of in their favor at this point, but they do still have to kind of deal with the whole Braun thing.
Yeah, so they're scheduled. So let's say he's out for the next 2 weeks, right? The next game is against the Nets. Supposedly, obviously, LeBron's already out.
Mm-hmm.
Rui's out, right? Because he's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be out at least another week. And they apparently Dorian Finney-Smith is hurt. I guess
Yeah.
apparently, according to that, it is the Nets. But the Nets are a feisty team. But that's a game that you can't lose because that's still not a very good team.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, then you have that stretch where you have the back-to-back against the Bucks and the Nuggets on the road, both on the road. Then you have a day off. Then you have March 16th and 17th, another back-to-back against the Suns and the Spurs. I think you need to beat the Spurs because that's another team that's not that great. The Suns don't have a great record. Obviously, they do have high-end talent, so ideally you should want to win that one too. Then you have another back-to-back again, right, after a day off against the Nuggets and the Bucks again, except this time they're both in LA. So that's the difference there. So, I mean, they only have 20 games left, right? Because their record is, what, 40 and 22.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can go 500 the rest of the way, then okay, that's 50 wins, so that'll probably be enough to stay in that top four range. If I'm honestly, right, for that stretch of games coming up, right, again, probably would like to. I think you probably, if we're talking about those 6 games, I mean, can you go 3-3? I mean, is that doable? I mean, that's that. I mean, because and I think ideally you need to get the Spurs win, and then you probably would like to get at least one win against Denver, and then after that probably the Phoenix game, right? Because because the Nuggets games are important because you need the tiebreaker, like I said, for both teams, right? So whoever wins both of those games, probably the 2 seed is they're going to be the favorite to get it. But
Mm-hmm.
again, you would like to have LeBron for those matchups. So, we'll see what happens, right? And then after that, right, because then you move into the last couple of games before the 2 weeks is up, the Bulls and the Magic. So, again, there are some winnable games in there. It's just they're going to be made harder because with the back-to-backs, some guys may not play, some guys are already out. So that's where it gets tough, and we'll see if they can come out of that okay, right? I mean, the schedule doesn't get any easier, right? Because they're going to be playing Memphis, Houston, Golden State, OKC twice, and Houston as well in their final stretch after that. A couple of bad teams in there, but it's a tough schedule. So that's where the injury really hurts because you'd like to get healthy, but they're not the only team in this situation. There are other teams that have some injury issues that they have to handle because we've talked about some of them already, including the Knicks, including the Grizzlies, even mentioned Houston for that matter as well. So we'll see if they can kind of handle it. And
Yeah,
then,
and that's
yeah,
the beautiful part about this latter part of the season. It really playoff environments are really starting to come alive. In the regular season, and that's
yeah,
going to be a factor too.
yeah. And we just got from Sham Sharania that Amen Thompson is going to miss at least 10 to 14 days, and the MRI
Sheesh.
showed no structural damage. So not the worst case scenario. So that's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we don't know how much longer after that, but that means at least a couple weeks probably, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the worst thing in the world considering, what they mentioned and they said no structural damage, but he did have swelling. So he's going to have to rehab and receive treatment for that. But at the very least, if there's no structural damage, that's good because that means he was able to avoid the worst case scenario, but it's still not great because again, Houston's also in that spot where they're trying to fight for a playoff spot because they've been not very good recently.
Hmm.
So they kind of need to start winning some games, or else they're going to drop, and Golden State's going to catch them because they have the tiebreaker against Houston.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and then from a Boston perspective, like you said, which we hadn't already talked about, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They've had a lot of good wins in this stretch where, again, they did have the loss to Cleveland, but by and large, a lot of times in a lot of these statement games, they've done a really good job. Like, because this Lakers game was, you could kind of tell, didn't look like that maybe so early on in the game,
Hmm.
but the rest of the way, you could kind of tell they were trying to make a statement. Same with most of the Knicks games, the Bucks games, couple of the Cavs games, because some of them they weren't able to, they lost two of those. But just as a whole, they've been pretty good against most of the best teams, right? They did lose to OKC. I think they play them one more time, but they beat the Nuggets twice. They split against the Lakers, although they've only played that version of the Lakers team once. And then they swept the Knicks, swept the Bucks, and then split with the Cavs. So if you get, again, this version of Tatum and this version of Jaylen Brown combined with, the other stuff that you're hopefully going to get from Porzingis and everyone else, right? Because Jrue Holiday came back in that game after he had been out with a finger injury, if I'm not mistaken. So if you can get anything close to something similar to last year from most of those guys with this version of Tatum, they're in a really good spot. Obviously, it's not as good of a spot as it was before because of the fact that you're not going to have home court throughout the whole playoffs. But, I don't think they have to have it because they've still been really good on the road. They've actually been better on the road this season than they've been at home. They're 24-7 on the road, 22-11 at home. So they're good either way. But the main thing for them is health. And the nice thing for them is they're pretty much locked into the 2 seed now.
Hmm.
There's not really a scenario like mathematically, yeah, they could drop, but they're not going to because they have the tiebreaker against the Knicks. And they're what, 5.5 games ahead of them with like 20 games left. So pretty unlikely the Knicks can catch them, especially with the Brunson injury. And
Yeah.
then obviously on top of that, they can't really catch the Cavs either. They're 7.5 games behind the Cavs. So at that point, right, they can pretty much kind of be in the mode of we'll play these guys when we need to, but there's no need to have to kind of, wear them down at all. So now you just kind of rehab and kind of nurse whatever injuries that they have and just get ready for the playoffs because they're pretty much set at this point.
Yeah, what they've been able to do in their last 10 games, this last stretch has been phenomenal. I think they've returned to form in terms of that dominance that we felt when the season was ending last year, where it's like, holy cow, this team is probably going to go all the way and will probably end up winning it, things of that nature. So that's the cool part, and I think the beauty of it is you look at Tatum and Brown, and they've just really found themselves at this latter part of the season and really just been popping off and silencing a lot of the haters, just by getting wins. And that's really all that
Yeah.
matters at this point for this team.
Right. And then we also had another great matchup, right, on Sunday, right? This was the battle between the Nuggets and the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's part one, right? Part two is on Monday, right after, our episode will have come out. But at least for part one, the Oklahoma City Thunder prevailed, right? This was, kind of a big game. It was a matchup of, the potential favorites to win, the MVP, right? And SGA put a stamp on it, right? 127-103. SGA in this game had another 40-point game
Mm-hmm.
with 8 rebounds, 5 assists, only 2 of 11 from 3, but still 15 of 32 from the field, 8 of 8 from the line with 3 blocks to go. Jokic, 24, 13, and 9 with 3 blocks and a steal, 2 of 10 from 3, and 10 for 23. So not great 3-point shooting from either team in this
Mm-hmm.
game. But that's not really what either team does. I mean, the Nuggets, percentage-wise from 3, I think are fine because they have, but it's just they don't take a lot of them. And then OKC just hasn't been that great at threes this season. Now, Jokic, I believe, he hurt his elbow in the game,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe that might have impacted his shooting. Who knows? And then Aaron Gordon got hurt in this game as well. He only played 6 minutes. So we did see, them without Aaron Gordon for most of the game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Other than the first part of the first quarter where the Nuggets did have a lead, but it's just the first quarter. But, SGA kind of showed, right, why, he's the guy that's trying to make the case for the MVP, doing it on both ends. Not that Jokic defensively was bad in this game, but just as a whole, you can see what SGA can do And, in this game, I think the nice thing that helped was you had a game where Jalen Williams showed up because he was pretty quiet in the early stretch of the game, but he did show up, into his credit, in the second half. He played the most minutes out of any of the guys in OKC because it was actually a really close game going into the fourth quarter. And recently, OKC's had a number of games where it's close for like two and a half, 3 quarters, and then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, OKC pulls away, or in the second half of the third quarter, right? And so by that point, SGA hasn't had to play because he doesn't play to start the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
It's Jalen Williams, and he kind of led the charge to put the game away for Oklahoma City, right? And then SGA closed it out and put the second stamp on it, right, with the 7 points in a minute late in the fourth. So, again, obviously, Gordon gets hurt. I think he does a lot for this team, especially with the way he's been shooting the ball, too. We know defensively he's a big part of what they do. He's their best defensive player, pretty much. He's got a great connection with Jokic, right, as a lob threat and just as another guy that can kind of, help you stabilize your offense. But, for OKC, right, for Russ, minus 17, he had moments in the game where he was pretty helpful. He had 11 rebounds, including 7 offensive ones and 5 assists, but 1 of 9 from the field. But then you look around, Jamal Murray, 6 for 17, 1 for 5, and that was kind of the other difference in this game was Michael Porter Jr. was fine on offense, but you needed another guy, and Jamal Murray kind of has to be that guy. When he doesn't play well, it's harder for the Nuggets to win. And then for, OKC, you got your guy, to come along, Jalen Williams. And again, that's going to be the story come playoff time for them because a lot of people are kind of smelling blood for Oklahoma City right now, where people are not as high on them as they were to begin the season. Most people still believe they're the favorites to come out of the Western Conference, but obviously with teams like LA and Golden State making the moves that they made and OKC pretty much standing pat, right now people are trying to figure out how good is OKC going to look come playoff time? Because we know defensively they're awesome. It's just a question of how does that look come playoff time? What are they going to do with the two bigs? Because in this game they started together, and Chet was a plus 32 in the minutes he played. He just couldn't stay out of foul trouble. Right, there was a possession where he did foul Westbrook and it should have been a 6th foul, but they didn't call it. But that does happen over the course of a game, right? Lots of missed calls in pretty much every game, but that's kind of the big thing there is what are they going to do? What are the non-SGA guys going to do, right? So can is their defense going to translate into the postseason? And can these other guys minus SGA knock down shots? Because I think SGA, we saw in last year's playoffs, he was really good, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't say that he was the reason, a reason that they lost that series, right? It was just, it kind of came down to some of the other guys just played below what we saw them play in the regular season, right? I think the reasons for optimism this year compared to last year, everyone was healthy the entire way, and their record was about the same as the other 2 seeds, right? This time they've had more injuries, and they're way ahead of everybody. It's just a matter of, are these guys actually going to take the jump come playoff time? And that's something that we'll have to see, because there's been a number of games where you'd like to see more from Jalen Williams, and you just didn't get it, right? And that's the question, because they're going to need that, right? Because for the moments when SGA isn't out there, or if he's in foul trouble, or if he's just not having a great offensive performance, that's the next guy that you're going to look to for shot creation, because he's the only other guy really that can kind of do that at a pretty consistent level, at least for the regular season, right? Holmgren's the next one, but he's a big, so that's a lot different. And maybe he just becomes like a third guy, and that's just enough. I don't know. But, it's just, obviously this was a great win for them. It's just, again, people are just wondering because since it's such a young team, you do kind of wonder, could they be had in the playoffs? I still think that they're the favorites to come out of the Western Conference, even with these other teams playing the way that they've played. But, again, as we've talked about, you can't help but feel a little less confident. But, again, it all comes down to the non-SGA guys. Because, again, if they can help get the job done, then they should be able to get out of the Western Conference, assuming they're healthy, right? But if not, then that's where things get a little bit scary because there's no one, because if that happens, there's not a guy you can just kind of plug in and just be like, go get us a bucket. Because that's not really the profile of any of OKC's bench guys, right? The closest, I guess, when he was healthy could have been, you could maybe AJ Williams or whatever, AJ Mitchell, whichever, the rookie that got hurt.
AJ
That
Mitchell,
played
yeah.
earlier. Yeah, either him or perhaps Aaron Wiggins, but again, we don't know what that is going to look like as much come playoff time. So we'll just have to see. But either way, it's a great win for them, and it probably helps boost SGA's case, I would think. Given that, again, they had a big matchup and he was the best player out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think this was, one of the games that had a lot of eyes on it for sure. And from what I watched, I think the MVP clearly goes to Mr. Alexander himself.
That was going to take a while.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's only right. It only makes sense at this point. You look at the numbers, you look at the productivity, you look at the record, you look at the advanced statistics. I don't need to delve into it, but yeah, he's been having, one heck of a season. And the Thunder as a whole, they've been having one heck of a season. They're 53-11. I think that's nothing to really, gloss over like that. And, I think they have a recipe for success. They have a recipe for winning. You look at it, when Shea's not on the floor, it's J-Dub kind of going to work, and the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Like you said, at times he's had some moments where he looks a little fraudulent, but I think that's really just, him being a young player. Like, those are going to be growing pains. It can't happen in the playoffs if they really want to, win the title. And I think that's where Chet Holmgren comes in. I think he'll be able to relieve some of that pressure, and what he's able to do on both ends of the floor is amazing. This identity of the team is for sure two-way all the way. We knew that coming into the season. We knew it last year. We knew it from, the fact that they even acquired a guy like Shea in the first place. Like, we know what he's able to do on both ends of the floor. And I think the growth that the entire team as a roster has had on the offensive end is really what kind of puts them over the top and over all these other teams in the Western Conference for me. My confidence isn't really shaken on them coming out of the West. I think they're deep. They're the most talented team for sure. And like I said, they have that recipe for success. You have a guy like Shea who's going to pretty much get you a certified 30 points a night. That's guaranteed. That's locked in. Like you said, the only question marks are, how many points is J-Dub going to give you? Is it going to be efficient? Is it going to result in a win? That's the question I think that everybody does have. But I think he's ready. I think they're all ready. I think Chet's ready as well. I like the two big lineup that they do run. The versatility is there. With Chet and Hartenstein. So, they've kind of alleviated some of the issues that I think people did have coming into the season. They bolstered up the defense when you kind of didn't really think that it could get much better than that. But a guy like Caruso's been playing pretty well defensively. I think it really comes down to offensively, what does the productivity look like, outside of Shea? Pretty much word for word, like you just said. Because I think the role players are good. Kassan Wallace, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe. I think their strengths, obviously, are the 3-point shot and, playmaking and things of that nature and defense as well. But yeah, where does the shot creation come from? And I think all eyes are for sure on J-Dub and probably Chet as well. But who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I guess after what you've seen with this two big lineup, because again, like early in the season, we didn't really get to see it at all because both of those guys missed time back and forth, right? But after what we've seen recently, right, where they've been able to play more games together, what do you think of it in comparison to, the lineups of where one of them is out there, right? Like, let's say it's, and it could just be matchup dependent, right? Maybe where they feel confident enough to where Hartenstein doesn't always have to start. But how do you feel about that two big lineup in terms of, do you think that there are some teams that might be able to exploit it? Or do you feel like that should just be what they're doing going forward? Because, we're starting to get more games of what it looks like. And in some of the games, it looks kind of not great. And then there are other games where it doesn't seem too bad. But, all in all, like, I feel like they're probably only going to close with one big at the end of the game. And maybe that's all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think closing, I think you should probably close with one big because, realistically, there's, how many top tier centers are there that you really have to worry about, in the fourth quarter and things of that nature. So, that's kind of what I'm looking at. And I do like the fit between Chet and Hartenstein, especially on the defensive end, having Chet be that guy that kind of just patrols and roams around. But I think that does have its pros and cons because when he's roaming around like that, he's probably more prone to getting like a foul, like a lazy foul or something like that, trying to play catch up or something like that, versus him kind of being the sole rim protector. because both of them are pretty good defensively. Obviously, we know what Chet can do with his length, his wingspan, and his frame. So I would kind of like them to mix it up. Um, throw some different looks at different teams, like you said, depending on the night and depending on, who you're going up against. Because I think in this Denver game, you needed that size. You needed those bodies to bang down low because, you're looking at Aaron Gordon, although he only played like 7 minutes, but you're looking at Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic. And I think, you need some weight and you need some bodies to bang down low with those guys. But then if it's like a faster team or a team that, is more perimeter oriented, then I think you're fine with having Chet be the sole guy or whatever the case may be, whatever lineup you want to run. But I think that's the cool part is they're so versatile that on a nightly basis they can choose whether or not to go 2 bigs or 1.
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of
related.
curious. Yeah, exactly, and that's where I'm kind of curious to see because, like you said, against a team like Denver, you want to have 2 bigs 100,000% because you need that extra size to battle with the big guys that they have out there. So, like, again, I am curious to see what that looks like come playoff time, just because, again, that's where I think the 3-point shooting is probably going to have to improve from some of these guys where, because for most of the game, they shot really poorly from 3. And I feel like there's going to be a couple of games it's probably going to have to get better. It actually, the way they pulled away in this game was the 3-point shooting did come alive in the fourth quarter. Because, like I said, it was a close game for most of it, right? But it's funny because they hadn't played each other since really early in the season, and that was back when OKC looked different because they didn't even because I think they played opening night and Chet Holmgren played, so I think they may have played. I think they may have been, but I think Hartenstein was out; he didn't play, right? And that was also back when Denver wasn't playing well because they weren't, they were struggling a lot to begin the season. They've been a lot better since then. But it still feels like, again, against some of these better teams, it still feels like they don't look as dominant. And that's where you kind of feel like it still feels like they're not quite in that first tier, in comparison to what they might have been before. Like, like it seems like Boston, Cleveland, OKC probably should go in the first tier. And then maybe you put Denver maybe at the top of the second tier, or you can put them at the bottom of the first year. It really depends on how you feel about it. But there's something about them that doesn't seem like they're quite as good as those teams. And maybe come playoff time, it'll look different just because, we know what Jokic can do. And if you can get some of these other guys to kind of come along for the ride, you might be okay. But what do you think about that? Or do you feel like, they're right there with everyone else?
I mean, it's tough. I think the starters and, the top tier talent and top end talent are up there for sure. Like they can go, neck and neck, like they're right there. Because I think, you look at their starting lineup on a nightly basis, obviously Jokic, top 2 player in the league, top 1 to some people, Jamal Murray, solid. Christian Brown having a very quietly very good season. Michael Porter Jr. solid. Aaron Gordon very solid. Like, that's a great starting lineup.
Jaden Pickett.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jalen Pickett. I forgot about him, but but their bench is, I think, where you do have some concerns at times because looking around, like let's say this game. Granted, Aaron Gordon didn't play, but you look at the minutes distribution. Westbrook, he's been solid for them. I think a very underrated pickup. But then after that, we're looking at Peyton Watson sometimes, Zeke Naji sometimes, Jalen Pickett. I mean, like, sure, they're better than what they were at the beginning of the season, but it doesn't really give me the championship vibes, It gives me kind of the vibes of the Denver of old where, yeah, they're gonna probably go like maybe to the Western Conference Finals or, the semis or whatever, but I don't know if they can really get back to form with a roster that's built like this. I think you need more depth. You need more guys that probably fit the system slightly better. And I mean, to be honest, I really think you need a backup big, like a legit playable backup big, and they just don't have that. I know they drafted Holmes, but he had the whole Achilles thing, so he wasn't able to play. So you kind of remedied that in the offseason, but it didn't work out. But I think they really truly do need a backup big because it comes down to everything that we talked about last year. Non-Jokic minutes. What the heck are we doing? That's the problem. Like you look at his statistics when when he's on the floor, or the team statistics when he's on the floor and when he's off, the contrast is just too great, and that's how the roster is built. But that's where I think they're kind of a tier below.
Mm.
But that starting lineup, I would say, can go tit for tat with almost any team in the league.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main thing. Again, is like we know teams are going to try to swarm Jokic, and they're going to make the other guys beat them. They're going to try to test their 3-point shooters and see if they're up for the challenge. And like you said, they're going to need at least a couple of guys off that bench to pop off the way that they were able to when they won the title, right? Because like the year they won the title, you did have Bruce Brown, and then occasionally like a Jeff Green or somebody, right, that would come in and just kind of help them for like even like 5 minutes off the bench, right? Like that's the type of stuff that you want. And for what it's worth, like you said, some of those young guys have played well. It's just a matter of, do we believe that they're going to be as impactful come playoff time? The good news is the starters will play more in the playoffs, right? Like you're not going to have, like I don't know, 10, 15 minute, 15 minutes where Jokic isn't out there. His minutes are going to go up to like 40, right? Something like that. So that's where that's nice, right? You don't have to have as much depth going into the playoffs. It's just, again, it would be nice, I think, also defensively. It does feel like in some of these games, they just are really easy to score on.
Oh, yeah, you saw it in this game.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like for a team like OKC, who is a really good defensive team, right? Like there's just certain stretches where it just gets really rough. Like even the game where they beat the Suns, right? Like that was a game where, because we didn't even mention that, right? That was the 30-20-20
Oh, yeah,
Jokic
I forgot
game.
about that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
First
right.
one ever,
But like,
right?
yeah, exactly, right? And the Nuggets had a big lead twice, and then the Suns just came all the way back into the game because they just caught fire. Now, in the overtime, it was done, right? But just in general, right? Like there are other teams that are just better on both ends of the floor than a team like Phoenix, where
Mm-hmm.
that's where you just kind of get concerned, right? Because there are certain types of guys that I just don't think they're going to be able to guard. Like they just don't, to me, have anybody that I think you can really trust to guard SGA for stretches, right? Or
Agreed.
we saw it, even in that Lakers game, right? Like I don't think they really have anybody where you can feel good about, like, oh yeah, we'll let you guard Luka, right? And name any other guards that you want in the West or the Eastern Conference. That's the part that scares me a little bit, right? Whereas like before, you had KCP, you had Bruce Brown and Christian Brown, where you could put all those guys right on a guard and
Yeah.
feel decent about it for stretches, right? Like, but now it's one guy in Christian Brown, and he still has certain types of weaknesses as a defender where,
Mm-hmm.
again, where that's going to be a problem. I think on the ball, right, just as a physical guy, he can be fine. But I think, say, away from the ball, certain areas like that, because he's not like KCP is a different type of athlete, right? He's a little bit more, I don't know, wiry, right? And I think a
Sure.
little bit more capable of just chasing guys around,
Sure.
whereas Brown's a more physical guy. So there's pros and cons to all of it, but it's the defense and the depth that has me a little bit concerned. And like I said, even the 3-point shooting, because like again, they can make some of these threes. It's just they're a pretty low volume 3-point shooting team, and in the playoffs, again, they're going to force some of those guys into those type of shots. Like they're going to force Westbrook into jacking up threes, and can he make them? He doesn't have a history of really making them in the postseason. If he does, right, then obviously that's going to help. And then if not, then they might not be able to do it this time around. So we'll see. But I think they're a more vulnerable team than they have been in the past, right? Because before we felt like that they were kind of an unstoppable force, but it doesn't seem like that now. They're still really good,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
this season, considering they haven't been as good against the best teams, I just don't feel as confident in them as I did in the past. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
still
I agree.
they're still for sure a title team. I just don't think they're no longer a favorite in the West anymore. They could still do it, but it's going to be really difficult, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point about their defense. Like in this Oklahoma City game, like you saw times where it's like Russell Westbrook is giving 100% effort on
Yeah.
like towards the top of the key, and then the
Right.
moment he gets screened, it's just chalked. It's an automatic SGA pull up mid range, and even when there were no screens, it's like, bro, it's like they kind of give up. You know what I mean? And like you said, it's very easy to score on this team, and I think that is not a recipe for, a title run or anything of that
Right.
nature.
Yeah,
So,
for Jokic, this isn't one of his best seasons defensively either,
oh,
right? And some of that is like it. I guess you could make the case that he's got more offensive responsibility, I guess, this season, right? In some ways, but it hurts because again, I think ideally you need him to kind of be at a certain level defensively, just from the perspective of it's going to be a lot harder if they just can't get stops, right? And
yeah.
maybe it's an effort thing, and maybe just come playoff time, you'll just see an improved version of that. But, again, he's the least of their concerns, right? Like, I
Oh,
think the
yeah.
main concerns would be, some of the other guys on the roster where can you feel comfortable about trusting some of those guys in a playoff series, especially, again, when you're going to need more than 5 guys to probably pull it out against these type of teams. Because I just think the league has gotten better to the point, and they haven't, to me, improved at the level where they're gonna have the safety net. I don't think they have that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then after that, we also got a matchup between the Cavs and the Bucks, right? Obviously with the Bucks, they've been playing, at a really, really, really high level. Where what are they like 8 of
Eight
their
and two.
last 10? Yeah, 8-2 in their last 10. Where Kyle Kuzma, he's come in and he's helped them out. We talked about that where I think the hope was could he be more available than Chris Middleton? Can he be not a disaster, like he was looking like in Washington? And it looks better, right? I know the shooting splits are not the best, but I think you watch him play and it does feel like just more impactful than what he was doing in Washington. You know what I mean? Like I think,
Yeah, I agree.
they're yeah, like they're and again, like there's like a few minutes left in the game. Looks like the Cavs are probably going to pull it out. Not really that particularly close. And
No.
this was an interesting game going in because of the fact that the Cavs had beaten them the previous 3 matchups. But I don't think Giannis played in any of those matchups, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
because he was hurt, right? This was the first one where both teams were basically at full strength. Obviously, the Cavs also made that big deal too, or with DeAndre Hunter, and this again, like with the Bucks, it's still another one of those games where they're good, they're just not quite as good as I think the other teams. And I think considering the way that the Cavs have been playing, it's really hard to, it's kind of hard to not take them seriously at this point. Not that we weren't, because we already were. It's just with the way the Cavs have been playing recently. I mean, they've won 13 in a row. Assuming they clear out this Bucks game, it's going to be 14 in a row. They're going to, 53-10 as of right now, the best record in the NBA. And this team is legit. Like we've talked about them before, where we saw what they were doing early on in the season, right? And not that we dismissed it, but we wanted to continue to see more. And we got a pretty significant sample size now that lets us know this is a special, special basketball team. Obviously, I'm curious to see what some of this looks like come playoff time. But, when you watch them play, they are deep. They are really good on both ends of the floor, especially offensively. And they've added some guys, right? Because again, like DeAndre Hunter, not crazy in this game, but he's had a number of games for them where he's contributed big time to their wins. Just as another wing that can get hot, that you can put out there for stretches, maybe get you some stops, and again knock down some timely shots. It just kind of allows for them to be in a spot now where they're not quite as reliant on some of the other guys that they had out there before, right? Because Strus is the starter, but now you can split his minutes between him and Hunter, where where you don't have to play Max Strus for like 30 plus minutes. You can if he's hot, because he had 17 and 9 in this game, but and that was only in 22 minutes, right? And
Right.
then you look around. Dean Wade, right? He's a guy that can kind of come in and help out. Isaac Okoro doesn't even play as much anymore, right? Like that was their starting small forward, right?
Yeah.
For the last few seasons. And now
Yep.
he's kind of been relegated to a backup, right?
Which is
Which
fine.
is which is fine, which is kind of what you want. And Strus, right? Obviously he's a different type of player, but just in general, I think I've been blown away by most of what we've seen from the Cavs this season, where you just watch them play and they just look like they're on another level. And you kind of at times like, because I picked the Celtics to come out of the East and win the title, but there's a lot of times where like I'm watching them where I feel like they could really do it and pull it off. And make it out of the East and win it all. Like I really do think they can do that. I'm still rolling with Boston because I don't really want to change my pick. But with the way that the Cavs have been playing all year, like I mean, they've only lost 10 games all season. It's really hard to not pin them as the favorites. But I think really they're kind of in the same spot, just like OKC's. Both teams are in the same spot that Boston was in last year, where people are going to continue to kind of dismiss them or doubt them until they actually pull it off. So it's going to be up to the Cavs to kind of show everybody that this is a team that's for real, that needs to be taken seriously. But like I said, just given the way, what we've seen from them, like even in this game, Mitchell was 4 for 15, right? Garland was 4 for 13. Both of them a combined 2 for 15 from three. But again, they held the Bucks to under 100 points, right? And again, like, the Bucks have been on a tear recently, right? And they were able to, slow them down, make things difficult. Again, the two big lineups, obviously Giannis still at his 30, right? But, limiting most of the other guys, right? Like Lillard was not that great, 8 for 19, 22, he was fine, right? Kuzma was okay, but just as a whole, the bench for the Bucks, that's also the other difference because the Cavs are just a much deeper team. Like the Bucks don't have anybody like some of the guys for the Cavs coming off the bench. They don't have a DeAndre Hunter level player, even a Ty Jerome, right, who's had a fantastic season, all on a minimum contract, right? They just don't have those type of players, and that's where I think there's levels to how good some of these teams are, and like I said, that's the tough part for a team like the Bucks because the Cavs, again, they're in a great spot where they have the best record in the league and certainly in the East, so they're gonna have home court presumably through at least the East, right? Obviously, we'll see what it comes down to in the West, right? But for now, they pretty much are going to have home court the entire rest of the way. And again, it's just kind of wild just to kind of see what they've been able to do. Just because, I mean, again, we were wondering what in the world was going on. Just because we thought this team would be better, and we liked this Cavs team. I think going all the way back to their first playoff matchup against the Knicks. I think we picked them to beat the Knicks, but they kind of disappointed in that series because they just weren't ready. They weren't ready. Their young guys weren't as good, and they weren't very deep. But now all those guys have gotten better, including guys like Mobley and Garland and even like a Jared Allen, and they have way more depth. So like this is a team that I think you can feel much stronger about. And again, they're having a historic season. I mean, again, according to Underdog NBA, right, they're one of only a handful of teams that have two separate 14 or more game win streaks in the same season, right? And the last team to do it was the 2017-2018 Rockets. Now they weren't able to win. Chris Paul got hurt. But just as a whole, this is a special team, right? And again, like they're looking like they may head towards, blow past the 60 win mark. We had them as an over, but I think we probably pegged them to probably max out around 50. But they're going to go way past that now because they have about 20 games left. So, I mean, they could push this to 65, depending on what they do the rest of the way, depending on how many of their guys they play. Because they're still playing these guys. And again, all their minutes, right, have been managed pretty well. Because, like, they don't have to play anybody like 35 minutes, or more a night. All those guys are, like, basically in the low 30s, right? So I mean that's it's a great thing. Yeah, they ended up winning 112 to 100. So
Okay.
Again, that's just kind of wild, because again, like it's just really exciting to see this team.
Yeah, this team, I think we've been singing their praises, pretty much the entire year. From the roster from top to bottom is, put together perfectly. Kenny Atkinson, the changes that he made to, the offensive scheme and what their true, goal is, to win basketball games is definitely clear and evident. And I think numbers wise, having Garland kind of returning to form, that helps, a tremendous amount compared to last year. The two big lineup, Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, them being able to coexist is awesome because I remember after their postseason last year, after the flame out, we were like, we were kind of selling stock on this team because we were like, oh, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell will never be able to coexist. They're two small guards that don't defend. Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Yep, they just got bullied off the court, stunk, garbage, whatever. But, now they've really change the narrative through the regular season. I think there still are questions come postseason, but with a team as deep as this, it somewhat mirrors what Boston does and what they're able to accomplish. In terms of their rotations that they're able to put out. On nights that they win. You're getting contributions from pretty much everybody. Like I said, top to bottom, they address a lot of concerns at that wing spot. That was one of the problems that they had last year. So, bringing in guys to really bolster that position up and make it one of the deeper parts of their roster is definitely a phenomenal way to turn that around. And yeah, defensively, the leaps that everybody's taken, Evan Mobley, practically being depoy at this point, that's pretty special, what he's able to do on a nightly basis, perimeter wise and interior wise. And then couple that with whatever Jared Allen is able to do on a nightly basis as well. Like you said, Giannis had 30 points, but it's more so about team defense. What were you able to do to limit the Bucks as a unit, not more so just one guy. And yeah, like you said, they shut him down, shut him out. And yeah, it's pretty special what this team has been able to accomplish throughout the regular season. And, I hope that it does continue through the postseason because, there are a lot of questions about this team and, hopefully they can kind of answer them. But yeah, having a lot of these guys, show up and not really crumble, under a lot of the criticism is really special too, I think.
Yeah. Pretty much as long as this continues, really all the guys on that team are going to have a narrative shift about them in terms of just where we looked at all of those guys a year ago compared to now, right? Because even with Mitchell, right, a lot of people felt like, okay, a guy that's gotten a lot of regular season wins but hasn't done much in the postseason.
And he's a riser too. It's funny.
Right. Yeah, exactly, right? And then, like you mentioned with Garland, right? Like last year he wasn't great, but you had the jaw thing, right? But people have, kind of thought about, well, come playoff time, he seems like a lesser version of himself, right? Jared Allen was horrible against the Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
Mobley, horrible against the Knicks, right? But both of those guys, like I said, are miles and miles better than what they were now, especially, offensively, I think is kind of the big growth for both of those guys, right? Because with Allen, it seems like he's added a little bit more skill where he's not necessarily just like a run and dunk lob threat guy.
Sure.
He actually's got, some really good touch with, those floaters, those push shots. And then Mobley, right? Being able to add that 3-point shot and feeling like he can be more impactful around the basket, right? As opposed to kind of just, wilting under some of the contact. Again, different teams, different types of matchups, obviously. But again, and that was kind of the case to be made for if people thought that they shouldn't break it up. The case to be made was always they had a bunch of injuries last season. They have a lot of young guys. Hopefully they get better. Presumably new coach, which is what they did. And it's worked out pretty much for them this whole season, right? Where, again, I think, like you said, now the question is, can they get it done in the playoffs? And I think they're going to be poised to. I think, because, again, with the way they've been playing, to me, they pretty much have, I would say, a really good path at going to the conference finals because the bottom of the East is just at a level where I don't think you're really concerned about any team in that, 8 through 11 or 12, right? Not like anyone that's the 8th seed, I don't think you're concerned about them at all, right? So you're looking at Atlanta, Orlando, Miami, Chicago, and then, who knows what happens with Philly or Brooklyn. I mean, they probably don't get in at this point, but you're not worried about any of those 4 teams, right? Hawks, Magic, Heat, Bulls, if you're the Cavs. Then you play whoever's in the 4-5 matchup, probably Bucks, Pacers, whoever wins that, unless the Knicks drop. I mean, I don't think you're concerned about losing to them. You could, but I think, they would have the advantage just if they, continue to play the way they've been playing. Right?
Yeah.
And then after that, it's the conference finals, right? So to me, they pretty much have a direct path to the conference finals. It's just a matter of will they be able to take out the Celtics, who are probably going to be waiting for them there. And that's where you do kind of wonder, because I feel like the Celtics match up pretty well against that Cavs team, just because you have the best case versions of wings, right? Which are the type of players that the Cavs don't have as many good options for. But again, the Cavs have a pretty balanced, deep team as well. So there's a world where they can pull it off, especially if Mitchell can somehow kind of play anywhere close to either of Boston's wings, whoever the best one in that series is. But you're going to need Garland, I think, to be better. And I think you're going to need, most of the other guys to play their game. And I think they can. It's just I'm still going to pick the Celtics, at least as of right now. But right now, it's really hard to go against the Cavs with the way they've been playing, just because they've only had like one semi rough stretch this season, and that was kind of coinciding with Mobley being out. So and maybe that's where you feel like they might be more vulnerable, because when he's not out there, their defense is not as good. But again, hopefully come playoff time, as long as he stays out of foul trouble, right, he's going to be out there more, right? Because he'll play more minutes, I think, than Jared Allen, because he's better, and I think he's more important to them. And, I think they'll be able to figure some of that stuff out against some of these teams. But I would love to see what it looks like against the Celtics, because, last year we didn't really get to see a lot of it, because by the time the series was a couple games in, a lot of their guys were hurt, right? Because Allen was already gone, and then Donovan Mitchell got hurt halfway through the series, and we saw 2 games, I guess.
Yeah.
And we didn't even see Jared Allen at all. But now, hopefully, we'll see both teams at full strength. We'll see if the Celtics can get healthier. But got to be impressed by what the Cavs have been able to do as of late and as of all season.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Cleveland, like you said, they've just been super special. The only thing that really is standing in their way pretty much is the proven champion, the defending champion. And I think, that's the matchup that everybody wants to see. Nobody's really competing with those two teams in the East at this point, and me being a guy who picked the Knicks to win, that sucks. But, at the end of the day, you do have to come to the realization that, Cleveland and Boston are pretty much neck and neck in terms of their, production. But Cleveland has home court, throughout the entire postseason. Right. So that's going to be huge for them. And I think that might be the deciding factor, if some of these matchups go to a 7-game series. So.
Right, exactly. That's where we're going to see it. Because, again, in the East, I feel like it's Cavs and Celtics, right? Yeah. And then out in the West, that's where it's a little bit different. Like OKC is the favorite. And then after that, who's the number 2? Who's the number 3? Like most people probably would say the Nuggets, right? And then after that, what do you think? Because I think, like I said, in the East, pretty clearly Boston and Cleveland. But out West, I think we both feel like OKC is still the favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And then who would you say is your number 2 and then your number 3?
Number 2 would probably be Denver, just because I think, you really can't count out Jokic. He's a proven champion, and some of the roster still is intact from that championship run. So I think you can never really count them out. I'm going to be real. I mean, this might be somewhat of a hot take, but the Warriors, man, I kind of like them. I think Steph has been balling. He's been on a whole nother level. Jimmy being out there, alleviating so much pressure. I think that's why everybody kind of fell in love with the move. And yeah, they've just been balling 9-1 in their last 10. I know they're the 6th seed, so it's going to be rough, to potentially, go all the way or something like that. But, I think they still have a chance because they have a guy like Steph there. And I think honorable mention should be the Lakers because of, how well they've been playing, recently, up until the Boston thing. But, right. I think they have.
The injury thing is where you for now might drop them, because I think that can. Yeah, because I think before the LeBron injury, you probably would have had them, 3, and then maybe Golden State is 4. But we'll have to see what LeBron looks like coming back. But I think if they're healthy, I think that's going to be a really tough matchup. I think for the Warriors, their roster feels maybe a little bit more balanced, possibly. I mean, obviously the issue for them is you're still going to have to worry about what are you going to do against some of those teams with size.
Yeah,
like
that's
a team
the question.
Because right now they've been starting Draymond at the 5. But then obviously we'll see what Kuminga looks like when he comes back. How do you work with that? Because then you have a lot of guys that you're not really concerned about jump shooting wise, but he can help them score around the basket, get them to the free throw line even more. So yeah, they're the other team that I think, is probably the most dangerous, right? Like I think the 4 teams we mentioned, those are your top 4 teams, because it feels like Memphis is trending downwards because of the Triple J injury, and Ja we just need to continue to see more of, because it seems like he's playing through an injury. Then Houston, I mean, has been really good this season, but they haven't been as good recently, and I just think most people feel like come playoff time, that's going to probably come crashing down. Minnesota, funny enough, right, they've won 5 in a row, so they're like right there with Golden State, where I think they're like half a game or I think they're tied, but Golden State has the tiebreaker. And they both have easy schedules. And, with Minnesota, they've been banged up and they were starting to win games before some of those guys have come back. So I do kind of wonder where, could the sixth spot be down to one of those two teams unless Houston just kind of falls apart? Because with Minnesota, they've sneakily started to play better as they've gotten more of their guys back. And again, their schedule, just like Golden State's, is very, is amongst the easiest of the teams that are trying to make the playoffs. So
Yep.
that's the benefit to both of those teams, right? Where, whereas some of these other teams, their schedules are tougher as they're banged up and, trending downward in terms of health.
Yep.
Yeah. And Minnesota, I don't think is in the conversation with those teams, in my
Mm-mm.
opinion. Just, but they have been better.
Yeah. You can't
But
discount the
again,
record.
exactly, right? Yeah, it does look better, for them. But I still feel like come playoff time, I just don't really, love the idea of, some of the combinations of some of those guys. But we are seeing signs of life offensively for Jaden McDaniel, so that's great.
Mm-hmm.
It just, can he keep it up? How's it going to look, now that Randall's back in the mix and back in the fold? And then obviously Gobert will come back because he's been out, right? They've been able to play with Reed as their main big, and he's obviously a completely different type of big from Gobert, right? Where he's more offensive oriented, more floor spacing, 5-out type of guy,
Yeah.
compared to Gobert, more of an inside, more defensive minded
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much, yeah, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. We had a number of great games over the last few days. Obviously, we do have a comment to read before we get out of here. So, I'll let you read the comment and then, we'll close it out.
Yeah, this is my first time seeing this comment, by the way, but it is from on the YouTube short, and it's from the user Plexity TJ, I think is the right way to say that. And our short was in regards to the Dallas Mavericks and their unfortunate demise, and the end to their season has just been abysmal, with the whole Anthony Davis thing, Kyrie injury, so things just aren't looking good. But he said 1% chance, number one pick if they lose every single game with for the rest of the season. Worst trade of all time, official. And yeah, it is looking to be that way. I'm not really sure what the Mavericks, plan will be going forward because in the short I mentioned, that they could be a late entry into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. That was more so just to console Mavericks fans because they needed to hear something somewhat good, whether it, may not be, the most ideal situation for them. But, overall, just a waste of a season, just unnecessary too, completely unnecessary. You would have been better off just keeping Luka Doncic and, continuing to build around him and, continue to contend for a long time. But, now you're sitting here pretty much done for a long time, I think.
Yeah, because that's the thing is now AD in his first game, right, ended up getting hurt, and we'll see if he plays again. I don't know because they may sit him the rest of the way. Just and then obviously Kyrie we've already talked about, right, where he's got the torn ACL, and again his season done, and he'll be out for most of next year too, right? So we'll see what they do in the summer. I know there had been talks about maybe they were gonna try to acquire a third guy like a Kevin Durant, or something like that. Who knows? I mean, with what? I'd be curious to know. But I mean, again, we've talked about the Durant deals where Phoenix doesn't really have leverage. So I don't think anybody's going to have to give up anything crazy to get him. But you're still going to have to make the salaries work. And that's going to be the tough part going forward. But either way, at least as of right now, yeah, Dallas is in a world of hurt. Because again, like you said, they pretty much closed their championship window, in my opinion, because again, with the Kyrie injury, it's going to take him a while to get back to what he was, if he even does, obviously because of his age and his injury history. Hopefully he does, but that's the tough part. AD, right? Another guy where he had been healthy the last couple of seasons, but wasn't able to play most of his games in Dallas. And it just sucks because, again, we got a game where you saw the potential and you saw the vision, but even despite the fact that we still thought it was a bad trade for the Mavs, and now it looks even worse, right? Where, now the Lakers, again, maybe they don't win it all this year, but they're in the mix now, right? Compared to they were probably going to start trending downwards, right? If they had kept their, main duo that they had, but now they're going to, worst case scenario, be the same. And they've been like a top 5 team this year. So
Yeah.
just a brutal brutal decision by the Mavs. But and like the commenter said, probably very unlikely they get the number one pick. Of course, it's
Very, yeah.
possible, right? Because I think the Hawks, they had a very slim chance of getting the number one pick, and they got it, right? Not the greatest draft to get the first pick, but either way, crazy things can happen. So we'll see. But it's a good point by the commenter.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And now that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about, what a great weekend of basketball this was. What did you think of all the matchups? How screwed do you think some of these teams might be in terms of their injury situations? Because for some of them, it is bad. But just in general, let us know, right? And again, continue to leave comments on the shorts or the videos. If you leave one, we will pick one and read it at the end of the episode. And continue to like and subscribe as well to help our channel grow. We appreciate the support, and we'll see you next time.